In a time long ago, there was a great king. He ruled justly and fairly, but he was a proud and arrogant man. Besides this, he loved conquest. He had a vast army, and very often he went out with his army into the field of battle, loving to win and conquer. But one day, when he was out with his army abroad, he came to a strange place, an inhabited place. And as he stood on the fringe, and his gaze moved across the land, he took note of the simple dwellings that were dotted there amongst the trees, stately trees. And under each tree sat an ascetic in lotus position, so serene and still that they appeared to be part of the trees themselves. It was a place of great abundance, fruit trees laden with luscious fruit. And then, as his gaze moved around, he saw, sitting under a majestic oak tree, one who could only be known as a saint. And he realized that he'd stepped in to the habitation of the great sage and saint Santishpa. Santishpa, sitting, eyes closed, sensed the presence of the king and opened his eyes and arose to go to greet him, inviting him into that place. The king bowed low in front of Santishpa in greeting and obeisance. And then Santishpa, with his own hands, fed the king with the fruit from this abundant garden, mangoes, peaches. And they spoke of spiritual things. Their conversation lasted for some long while, and the day passed. And the king finally said to Santishpa, "It is time for me to leave. My army awaits me." Santishpa said, "Wait, bring your army here. They must be hungry." "Oh," said the king, "we're 1,000 men. How can you feed 1,000? "Bring them," said Santishpa, "bring them." So with much clattering of armor and shuffling of feet, the army was brought in to this place. And as they sat and waited, Santishpa spoke quietly and said, "Mahendara, Mahendara, come, we have guests." lights. And before the eyes of the king and the soldiers, points of light began to form. And before their very eyes, it took the form of a cow. Horns glistening like two gilded steeples, luminous eyes shining, silken skin, and an udder that was filled and gorged to overflowing. Santishpa said, "Feed these men." And in an instant, it seemed that every single soul that was present was given just the delicious fare that they would have longed for in their wildest dreams. Along with the king, they ate with relish. But all the time that he was eating, the king was thinking to himself, "What is this? What power has this saint? I want it." And when the meal had been finished and all had been cleared, the king asked Santishpa, "What was this?" And Santishpa replied, "This is Mahendara, the cow of plenty and abundance." The king said, "Sell her to me." Santishpa replied, "She is not for sale. She has no price." The king said, "But I'm the king and you're a saint. You do not have need for such." Santishpa said, "You don't understand. Mahendara is closer to me than my skin. She is what I am. She is not for sale. You cannot separate her from me. I demand that you give her to me." Santishpa said, Only when one has attained a state of purity does a Mahendara come unbidden." But the king was incensed. He wanted that cow, that power. So he said to his soldiers, "Take her!" But as the soldiers approached and attempted to grab the cow, again she dispersed into 1,000 points of light which disappeared. The king was so angry. He said to his soldiers, "Kill him!" But as the soldiers approached Santishpa, flames came out of his mouth, and all the soldiers were burnt to cinders before the eyes of the king. The king was so incensed and angry. He jumped on his horse, riding off, determined that he would return and take his revenge on the great saint. When he returned to his palace, the king could not rest. He paced, sleepless, he realized that to attain the power to take the revenge that rose in his heart, he would have to seek weapons at another level of existence. So he handed his kingdom over to his son, and he went to seek the greatest sorcerers in the land. And with those sorcerers, he learned through the practices and disciplines of those arcane arts, the ways of the weapons of the occult. It took many years, but armed with these weapons, he again went to the abode of the great saint and sage Santishpa. When he arrived, Santishpa was in his hut, and the king immediately sent an occult flame that incinerated the hut in which Santishpa was. Congratulating himself, the king laughed. But as he laughed, out from the burnt ruins of the hut came Santishpa. His hair was singed, his robes burnt. He was carrying a wooden staff. The king was greatly disappointed that this power had not done its work. So he took out others of those occult weapons that he had learned and gained over his years. But they were to no avail. Nothing seemed to touch Santishpa. The king had finally to resort to his final weapon, a poisoned arrow. He pointed it at Santishpa's heart and let the arrow fly. But it seemed that the staff that Santishpa held in his hands opened up, and the arrow fell harmlessly at the feet of Santishpa. The king was mortified. But then Santishpa, taking his staff, said to the king, "Now you have disturbed my peace, I will kill you." And he took up his staff and was about to strike the king on his head, when the ascetics that were sitting under the trees arose and said, "Santishpa, don't forget who you are. Return to your tranquility and serenity." In that moment, Santishpa took his staff and brought it to the front of his being, aligning it directly in front. And as the king observed, Santishpa returned to his serenity, his tranquility, with a smile on his face. Santishpa said to the king, "I pray that your anger will be that which brings you to realization and enlightenment. Go in peace. I wish you well." The king, seeing that he was utterly defeated, the weapons that he'd gathered, the earthly and the occult, useless, destroyed, he turned, and as he walked to return to his palace, he realized and remembered the words that the saint had said. Only in the state of purity can Mahendara come unbidden. What is this staff? This wooden staff? When aligned in our being, brings not only tranquility and serenity, but allows Mahendara to come unbidden.